Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Future of the Climate, a conversation with youth who founded a movement. This fest has been so exciting and inspiring over the past 5 days, and I'm so excited to see what insights, experiences, and visions for 2021 this conversation unveils. I'm Tali Diener, and I'm going to be facilitating this conversation. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a high school senior in Michigan, and I'm the campaigns director for Jewish Youth Climate Movement, or JYCM. A project of his own, JYCM is a movement dedicated to mitigating climate change by empowering teens, mobilizing our communities, and taking action. The only national dedicated youth climate movement within the broader American Jewish community, we believe in using Jewish values as a motivation to create a more equitable and sustainable world for all. I got involved with JYCM because of the values instilled in me as a kid at Jewish summer camp. Tzedek, justice, tikkun olam, healing the world, and that we are all Shomrei Adamah, keepers of the earth. I learned to love nature and our earth while envisioning a better, more equal world. When I heard about JYCM, it sounded like a great way to actually do that world shaping. I've gotten to help plan events, met with the Biden campaign about climate policy, made like-minded friends, and have grown as a leader and activist. As a young person, there's a lot at stake for me in the face of the climate crisis. There are less than 10 years until the effects of climate change are irreversible, and I think we all plan to live for a lot longer than that. In my home state of Michigan, erosion and flooding everywhere are affecting the people and places that I love, and the devastation of the water crisis in Flint that's been going on for 7 years is still terrible. JYCM gives me a sense of hope and purpose against my fears. I feel like I'm making a meaningful impact against something so large and scary, and my Jewish values are guiding me along the way. So here we are at the end of 5 days of amazing Jewish climate-related events. It's so exciting that we're transforming Tu B'Shvat from a day where we plant some trees to a day that the whole Jewish community is mobilizing for action on climate change. So how can we take our new knowledge from this fest and transform it into action? These 4 amazing Jewish youth climate activists are going to be sharing with us how they have changed the nature of being a young Jewish activist. We're going to be learning about what works in climate activism, discussing what a successful future of the movement might look like, how Jews can get involved in the movement for lasting change, and what our ownership and stake in this moment really is. I'm so excited to have our movement leaders here. Jamie Margolin from Zero Hour, Isha Clark from Youth vs. Apocalypse, Katie Eder from Future Coalition, and Amalia Hochman from Sunrise Movement. Each of you have redefined what it means to be a young Jewish activist, and we are so grateful that you are taking the time to talk with us tonight. I know this is going to be a great conversation. So first up, we have Jamie Margolin from Zero Hour, who's going to be talking about all her amazing experiences with climate activism. Jamie is a 19-year-old Colombian American organizer, activist, author, public speaker, and TV and film student. She is the co-founder of the International Youth Climate Justice Movement Zero Hour that led the official youth climate marches in Washington, D.C. and 25 plus cities around the world during the summer of 2018. Zero Hour has over 200 chapters worldwide and has been a leading organization in the climate movement. Her op-eds have appeared in the New York Times, Teen Vogue, Washington Post, Time Magazine, Dazed, Refinery 29, The Guardian, and others, and her debut book, Youth to Power, Your Voice and How to Use It, serves as a guide to organizing and activism. Jamie served as a surrogate for the Bernie Sanders 2020 presidential campaign and was also one of the youngest delegates at the 2020 Democratic Convention. She's received numerous awards and recognitions, including Fuse TV's Latina Trailblazer of 2018, MTV EMA Generation Change, winner of 2019, one of the BBC's 100 Most Influential Women of 2019, and one of GLAAD's 20 Under 20 LGBTQ plus people changing the world. Welcome, Jamie.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be on a panel of amazing Jewish women taking action on the climate crisis.
So we'd love to hear your story of, 5 to 7 minutes of what is exciting and something that can teach us how we can get involved in this moment.
Well, basically, my story started out with existential dread. Ever since I was little, I'd always kind of known about the climate crisis. I really can't pinpoint when I first learned about it. It's just always been a reality for me for as long as I can remember. And my first attempt at climate activism was in second grade. I didn't know what I was doing, but um, I think I saw this like documentary about the climate crisis, and we had a unit in school, and I heard some NPR stories about it, and I was like, oh my god, I have to take action. So I made these little green school pins to share with my no, green club pins in class, and I handed them out to some students, and I'm like, we're taking action, and they're like, okay, what are we doing? And I was like, well, I don't know, because I was in second grade and I didn't know what I was doing. And then that was the end of that. And so that was my first attempt. But I actually started when I was 14 years old in ninth grade. The 2016 election, I volunteered as an intern at my local Seattle Democratic campaign headquarters. I thought that, if we, at least Democrats believe in the climate crisis, and so we should keep Republicans out of office. And so I volunteered and I did the best I could. And then we all know how that election ended up. And so then I pivoted to issue-based organizing in my city of Seattle in late 2016, and I started organizing with a community organization called Plant for the Planet and a bunch of youth, and we went to Olympia a lot, the state capital of Washington State, where I'm from, and we started I would testify at bill hearings. So there was different bills. I remember the first bill I testified for, House Bill 1372, I think. And it was about like a climate recovery plan. And so I was testifying, and there were all these fossil fuel lobbyists there counter testifying. Went to Olympia and lobbied a few times, ran around the building trying to get signatures for this bill and like knocking down on all the like state legislators' doors and all of that. And I was, really naive and enthusiastic. And I thought like Democrats will help us because they're the good guys. And I didn't realize that that just because someone's a Democrat doesn't mean automatically they're a climate champion. But I was 15. At that point, I had just turned 15, and I was like, I was very, I had not been worn down yet by the world. And so I was very enthusiastic. And then, so there's been this lawsuit that's been going on for a long time called the Youth v. Gov lawsuit, which is basically this organization called Our Children's Trust has pro bono lawyers who help young people sue governments because of the climate crisis. And basically the concept is, as Americans, we have the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And you can't have life, liberty, or happiness without clean air, clean water, and a livable future. So the idea is that they were violating our constitutional rights, and you sue the government to have them implement a court-ordered climate recovery plan that gets us down to 350 parts per million carbon in the air, which is what we need in order to basically stabilize the climate. So I joined onto the lawsuit that is the Washington State specific lawsuit that is actually still going on to this day. So it's very slow. Lawsuits take forever. So I became a plaintiff on Aji Piper versus the state of Washington. Aji Piper is one of the other young people on the lawsuit. And then even after all of that, like I just wasn't seeing any action. The summer of 2017 rolled around, and so I've lived in Seattle since I was 2, and never in my life have we ever had a fire season. That's not a thing that we have in the Pacific Northwest until 2017. I would have remembered if the sky was covered in smog because I was living there. And suddenly there was these horrible wildfires, and the sky was covered in smog, and it was just horrible. And then there was Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, and that really motivated me to take the action further because, as you can see by the little flags, and I'm half Colombian, and I never used to really, I grew up speaking Spanish at home, but I went to a very WASPy school. And so I was kind of ashamed of speaking Spanish, ashamed of my background and heritage, because there wasn't any other Latino kids hardly in my entire school. And so I felt weird and alone, and they would make fun of my mother's accent because she's an immigrant. And then there was this trip that my mom and I took with my school to Puerto Rico. And that was the first time I'd been to a Latin American country. And it was the first time that I was like, oh, like, all these other suckers can't speak Spanish, but I can. Like, this is actually good. Like, all the other gringo kids were like, they didn't. And so anyway, Puerto Rico that trip to Puerto Rico helped me be proud of who I was and proud of my mother, proud of my heritage. And ever since then, I was like, you suckers can't speak Spanish and don't have all this culture that I have. Ha ha. And so then seeing Puerto Rico being devastated after having such beautiful memories, that really snapped me into saying, I need to take national action. And so I posted on social media the summer of 2017, when I was 15, that I was going to start a youth climate march. I asked who's with me. This girl named Nadia Nazar from Baltimore reached out and said, let's do it. And so I was like, cool. And then from the summer of 2017 to the summer of 2018, we were mobilizing, organizing, and what became of the organization creating the Youth Climate Marches is 0 hour, meaning we have 0 hours left to act on climate change. So the summer of 2018, we had climate marches in Washington, D.C. and 25 cities around the world. We also had a Youth Climate Lobby Day when we met with 47 members of the American Senate, including Bernie Sanders, which is when I got to meet him for the first time. So that was fun. Nice Jewish guy. And then the rest is history. And then everything started snowballing. After a couple weeks after the Youth Climate March, Greta Thunberg started climate striking, and the Fridays for Future movement took off, and we got involved there. And then I testified before Congress, which gave even more. And it's just been snowballing, but I guess that's my origin story of how I became a climate organizer. And yeah, that's me. So there we go. There you have it.
Thank you so much, Jamie. That was really exciting and really cool to hear your story. I'm a big fan of yours. So that was really cool. Next, we're going to hear from Amalia Hochman and her story of climate organizing in New York City and Boston. Amalia is 19 and working full-time for the Sunrise Movement, supporting middle and high school students. She first got involved with climate organizing as a junior in high school and co-led the September 20th Boston climate strike, bringing over 20,000 people to the strike. Following the strikes, Amalia dropped out of high school to work full-time for the movement. Since her time with Sunrise, she has helped create hundreds of new middle and high school hubs, trained thousands of new leaders, and led direct actions in support of the Green New Deal. She's currently on the refront loading team and helping to set Sunrise's strategy for the next 5 years. Welcome, Amalia, and we're so excited to hear your story.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I was thinking about what story to tell today. A lot came to mind, but I really wanted to narrow in on one of my favorite actions that I've ever planned. It all started in November of 2019, and I was at this really incredible Sunrise training. There's about 30 action leads across the country, and we were with some of the biggest Sunrise leaders, some of the founders of the movement. And for 4 days, we were just talking strategy, we were talking tactics, we were like, where is our movement going in the next year? And wow, it was honestly one of my favorite weekends ever. And we're also about a month, 3 weeks away from the December 6th strike. And me and the action lead from Boston, Sean, were both at this training, and we're like, okay, all weekend, we're like, let's really figure this thing out. What's our tactic? What's our strategy? What's our goal? And one of the days of the retreats, we had huge butcher block up all around the room, and we were writing down tactics for targeting government, tactics for targeting business, tactics for targeting the public. And okay, we were looking at all the tactics, and it was in our brains, and we're thinking about it for a few days. And the retreat ended. We were driving home together. We had a 5-hour drive, and the whole 5 hours we just planned the action. And we were pulling from the different tactics that we saw on the walls. And the two that really stuck were what would it look like to have young people in the halls of power, in the seats of power? How can we make that happen? And the second one is okay, we had September 20th, we brought 2,000 people to Boston Plaza, we went into the State House, what is our escalation arc? How can we step it up a notch? Because we need to show that we're serious and that we're coming back strong. And so what came out of that was this really incredible collaboration between the teenagers who planned the strike and some of the older members of Sunrise Boston. And how it went down was it's December 6th, 2019. We're in Boston, got a lot of young people like ready to go. And we've got a rally. Ed Markey's there. We're having a lot of fun. We're marching down to the State House, and some of the older members of Sunrise Boston are already sitting in Governor Baker's office. They got there at like 7 in the morning, and they're holding their ground there while we're coming up. And we get there, and we're outside. Our plan was to actually go into the like House Senate, and or the State House like Senate, and be like, okay, we're gonna like sit in these chairs, and like we're gonna actually pass the legislation that you failed to pass in this last year. We were not allowed in. We weren't sneaky enough. But we get there, and we're right outside the doors. You can see the title of the rooms right behind us. And we have bill after bill that a different young person is passing. And we read the bill title off. It was all of the climate legislation, and all the social justice legislation that just like we've been calling for our representatives to pass, and they just hadn't passed. And we were like, do we hear who are the gays? And people were like, yeah, and they're like, it passes unanimously, and we were cheering. There are hundreds of us packed in the State House. And once we passed all of our legislation, we like marched down from the chambers down this long hallway to Baker's office, where we saw the older Sunrisers sitting in. They're holding their grounds. The police were already there trying to get them out, but they wouldn't move. And we're marching towards them. We had this girl who was about 10, and we were pretending that she was Governor Baker, and we were like, Governor Baker, like, do you like pass this legislation? And she had her suit on, her tie on. She grabs a crayon, and she's signing Charlie Baker on all of this legislation. And I was like looking, like I had handed her the legislation, and the media swarmed in. There was probably like 20 different like news stations. Like they've got their cameras, they've got their like videos. Like it's really something. And she signs it all. We pass all this legislation, and we're like, Baker, like, if a group of young people can do this right here, right now, then you can too. And we're not leaving until you pass this legislation. And I sit down with the older Sunrisers. I turned 18 3 days before the strike, and I'm sitting down with them. And everybody who's at the strike had filled into the State House at that point. The hallways were packed. People were chanting. People were singing. And, I was like, this is so great. Like, the group of us sitting in, we're probably going to be here for like 5 more hours, but the people who are really excited, this is great, they'll be here for like another hour with us, like keep us going for a little bit. But another hour passed, and they were still there. They were going strong, and I was like, okay, this is something. Another hour passed, they were still there. The media was all still there. Actually, more was coming. And I had really never seen anything like this. And people stayed until the very end. The State House closed probably around 8 p.m. and the state police came in, and they told the crowd, and they told the media, and they told us that if we didn't leave right now, they were going to arrest us. And nobody left. Not the crowd, not the media, not us. And I had really never seen anything like it. And I could just tell in that moment, like the power that we held right there, that there were people who were not planning on risking arrest that day, who would not leave our side because they felt it too. They knew just how important it was that young people were standing up and saying that we needed this legislation, that we needed our elected officials to take a stand for us. And it probably took 3 or 4 warnings by the police to clear the crowd, but the media stayed. And it was not until they started getting their zip ties out that the media finally left. But they didn't even leave. They were waiting for us. The second we got out of the State House, they found the back exit where they were taking us to the police cars. And honestly, I think that was one of my favorite actions. I remember sitting in the squad car. They had these big vans. There's probably like 8 of us to a van, and all we could talk about was how nobody left, how we could like feel the power in the room like nothing before. Like even with the 20,000 people at September 20th, like the amount of courage and determination that every single young person, every single person in the media had that day was really like, I don't think I've felt it since then. And I feel like my actions that I do, like I'm trying to replicate that feeling of like, you have to be there and this is the place that we need to be. And this is how we win.
Next up, we're going to hear from Isha Clark, an activist with Youth versus Apocalypse, about her story doing environmental justice work. Isha, age 17, is a winner of the 2020 Diller Tikkun Olam Award for Jewish Team Leader.
I'm 18 now. I just turned 18.
Sorry.
Sorry. You have to do the same thing over and over.
It's okay. All right. Next up, we're going to hear from Isha Clark, a youth activist with Youth versus Apocalypse. Isha is 18 years old and a winner of the 2020 Diller Tikkun Olam Award for Jewish teens working to make the world a better place. Isha first became involved in the climate justice movement when a company proposed building a coal terminal in West Oakland, California. She and her peers publicly protested construction of the terminal, later forming the group Youth versus Apocalypse. Youth versus Apocalypse gained recognition when videos of its young activists demanding Senator Dianne Feinstein's support of the Green New Deal went viral, leading Isha to become known as a powerful leader fighting to reverse the climate crisis through community organizing, protests, and legislative change. Youth versus Apocalypse has brought national attention to the proposed West Oakland coal terminal, led the largest youth climate strike in the US, and done lots of other cool activism in California. As a nationally recognized writer, speaker, and presenter, Isha continues to represent the collective efforts of climate change activists across the US.
Hey, everybody. I'm Isha. I'm from Oakland, California, born, raised, and educated there. Let's see, I'm like trying to figure out the best way to tell this story, but okay, so I always felt really passionate about social justice, especially racial justice, because of my family. I have a lot of very politically active people in my family. And I remember, growing up, having very heated political discussions, at Passover, during dinners, during Shabbat, basically every time we come together as a family, we're talking about some political something. So that, was very deeply ingrained in me. And, on top of that, being born and raised in Oakland, Oakland is a very political city and has a very rich political history. We're the home of the Black Panther Party and one of the hubs of the anti-war movement. And, one of the co-founders of the Black Lives Matter movement is from here. And all of that is just so evident as you're walking through its streets and talking to its people and all of that. And despite this, I never felt, before I started this work, I never felt connected to anything that was climate or environmental related, because it was always portrayed to me as something that was frankly white, and that you had to have a relative amount of privilege to be able to care about. I mean, I think what 13, 14-year-old Isha was thinking is how can I care about saving the rainforest and the polar bears when I'm watching my people be murdered in the streets by police, And so anyways, in 2017, I was invited to an action targeting Phil Tagami, who is a very prominent developer in Oakland and who was at the time and still is trying to build a coal terminal through West Oakland. And, that coal terminal would be 2.5 miles away from my house. And West Oakland is a community that is predominantly working class people of color, and has also really had a long history of environmental injustice and has, rates of asthma, hospitalization, and stroke and other, pollution related illnesses that are twice the county and city average. So it's really just this hub for environmental injustice. And it was at this action that I realized two things. I realized how, first of all, what environmental racism even is, and how central environmental racism is to environmental injustice, and how wrong that narrative that I had believed about, or not even that I had believed, but that I had been fed by mainstream media about, you know, environmental and climate justice, that it's a white thing, that you have to have privilege to care about it, that it's, you know, about saving the rainforests and the polar bears, like how much of a straight up lie it is, and how, you know, environmental injustice is really Black and brown people, poor people, indigenous people getting years taken off of their lives, years being poisoned, being specifically targeted with pollution and poison. And all of that is a part of the same systems of racism and white supremacy and colonialism that fuel police brutality and economic inequality and all of these other things that I felt previously very passionate about. And so I kind of had this like full circle moment where I was like, how did I not know about this? Like, what is happening? This is crazy. And, you know, the other thing that I realized at that action was the power of young people. And on top of that, the power of people who are most directly being impacted by something, having the courage to stand their ground and speak out. You know, at this action, it was, you know, a group of middle and high school students of color, like from Oakland, who the theme was Christmas in June. And so we all had like little elf hats on and like, you know, had this long scroll that was signed by a bunch of kids in Oakland saying that we didn't want coal for Christmas. And we walked into his office, and, you know, like, with people like that, you're expecting that they're not going to come out and talk to you. You're just going to pass it to the secretary and they're going to do some whatever, like, you know. But we were walking up the stairs in his building, and I think we were chanting, and we caught him on his way to the bathroom. And so he was caught super off guard. And I mean, you can imagine there's like, what, like 15 young people with elf hats and a scroll, like walking up your stairs chanting, like, what? And, you know, he was like, oh, and and he was like, I'm gonna go to the bathroom and I'll just be right back. And we were like, okay. So he went and he was in there for a while, and we were like, maybe he's trying to escape. Like, we don't know, but he winds up coming back. And, you know, we start talking about why, first of all, it should be common sense, but why coal is bad, and why, how it will impact our communities, and really just asking him to protect us, to protect the kids of Oakland. You know, like, he has children that live in Oakland and he's still doing this. So we're talking to him, saying all of this, and he stands up, and mind you, this is like right around the time that Trump is elected. And he stands up and he's like, well, the media is only putting out one side of the story, and you guys only know one side of the story. And so I'm sitting here like baby Isha, probably like 13 years old, and I'm looking up at this guy, and, you know, like having the disgusting like words of Trump and like that mannerism kind of just floating around in my head, and like just drawing the similarities between like how he sounded and his poise and his position of power, and like how he was using it to terrorize me and my community and try to poison me. And so something just like sparked inside of me, and I was like, okay, well then tell us the other side of the story. And he kind of like was shocked, and he sort of like was like, oh my God, like, how do I answer that? Because there's no other side of the story. And he was like, oh, well, it's all in the media. Like, just, you know, Google it or something like that. And I was like, you said there's another side to the story, so please let us know. I think I said, like, give us the spiel or something. I was being a smartass. And, there was nothing for him to say. And I just remember watching him become visibly uncomfortable and worried, because I called him out on his bullshit. Like, excuse me, I don't know if we're supposed to cuss, or allowed to, but. And so that was the second thing that I realized during this moment. I realized my own power in literally just calling out the bullshit and getting straight to the objective truth, which is that there is no other side of the story. You are using your position of power to poison me and my community because you think that you can get away with it, and I'm not going to let that happen. And ever since then, I feel that sense of passion in doing this environmental justice work, and now, more specifically, this climate justice work and fighting for the world. And I feel like my experience on that day has really stayed with me throughout my couple years of work on this now, feeling like the ultimate goal is to speak truth to power. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Isha. Your story was so incredible. Like to visualize all those little kids wearing Christmas outfits. Thank you so much for sharing. Last but certainly not least, we're going to hear from Katie Eder, who's going to be sharing her experiences and journey through climate activism. Katie is the executive director of Future Coalition. Built by youth activists for youth activists, Future Coalition is a network of youth-led organizations and youth organizers across the United States that fosters community and collaboration while providing young people with the tools, resources, and support to power their ideas and amplify their impact. As a major force in the youth climate movement, Future Coalition coordinates the U.S. Youth Climate Strike Coalition. Katie is from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and currently a freshman at Stanford University. Thanks so much for being here, Katie. We're so excited to hear from you.
Thank you so much, and so great to follow three fantastic stories. And yeah, these three fellow women are some badass Jewish organizers, so totally honored to share space with you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my journey through climate organizing, which actually for me starts when I was also quite young. I grew up very involved in the Jewish community in Milwaukee, went to a Jewish day school, and Tikkun Olam was very much part of my values growing up, and just this idea that as people, we have an obligation to help other people. And even before I knew the words like organizing or activism or politics or anything like that, that was definitely something of just how I was taught to orient myself into the world. And so when I was in 6th grade, I took a class where we read An Inconvenient Truth by Al Gore, which at the time was sort of the leading literature around sort of the growing climate emergency, or what was then more formally known as global warming. And reading that book was completely mind-blowing to me, because it was the first time that I really understood there to be an issue larger than one community or one country, but something that was truly this existential threat to humanity. And to me, as like kind of a naive 6th grader, my response to that was, oh, people must not know about climate change, because if they knew about it, they would be doing something to fix it, which of course wasn't true. But I felt like the thing that, I had to do and my fellow classmates had to do as young people was get our classmates and other young folks to start raising awareness. And so I convinced a couple of kids at my school to go to our school principal and tell him that we needed to hold an assembly for our school about this existential emergency. And he finally gave in and let us have an assembly on Earth Day of whatever year that was, when I was in 6th grade a long time ago. We held an assembly, and it was, before we know a lot of the things we know now around collective action and what it looks like to engage in the climate movement. So we talked a lot about reusable straws, which at that time was a bit ahead of the trend. Gave everyone a reusable straw, talked about reuse, reduce, recycle. And we're really, dedicated to figuring out how we could just get more young people to understand that this was a problem. And so I remember going home that day after doing that assembly for my school and telling my dad that I wanted wanted to be an environmental activist when I grew up. And as the Jewish father he is, he told me that an activist is not a real job. And if I wanted to make any change, I should become an engineer or a lawyer. So that put me on a path for many years, believing that I wanted to be an environmental engineer, because that was what was going to be able to make the most impact, until I reached my sophomore year in high school and realized that math and science are just not my jam. So it's probably not the right career path for me. But after that experience with that assembly, I was trying to actively find ways as a young person to get involved with this sort of growing movement around raising awareness around the climate emergency. And there was just really no way to get involved. This was probably 10 years ago now. And so there was no infrastructure to support youth climate justice organizing or anything like it. And so it sort of very much like took a backseat for me in sort of my, I guess, organizing career. I moved on to get involved in a lot of like arts activism, particularly around writing and accessibility to creative writing, and then ended up getting very involved in the gun violence prevention movement my senior year of high school, which is sort of what led me into helping to found Future Coalition. And through our work with Future Coalition, what we do is we essentially act as a connective tissue between youth-led organizations and youth organizers, and then provide resources that traditionally have only been available to adult-led organizing. And so our model is that we work with a lot of other groups, and we support them and help and amplify their work for what they're doing. And so when Future Coalition started in 2018, we right away opened up the organization to support many different groups. At the time, my work personally was most focused on gun violence prevention, but Zero Hour and Sunrise were both founding members of the coalition, as well as a couple of other climate groups. And so, you know, around that time, there was energy around climate. This was maybe, you know, leading up to the 2018 midterm elections. But after we saw the 2018 midterm elections happen, there was a real noticeable shift in the US and globally around young people moving into climate. And Isha said it exactly right, is young people coming to the space and really disrupting how the environmental movement has been framed for so many generations, that this is not about polar bears or melting ice caps, but this is about people. And if we're going to address the climate emergency head on, we have to start at the systems that have created it in the first place. And that is the systems that have allowed people, particularly white people, particularly men, to put power and money over people again and again. And the youth came in and really disrupted that and said, you know, we are going to reframe what this movement looks like. And I think that's really what we've done over the last few years. You know, I think we have a lot to learn as a movement and to grow still, to do that in even more and to center justice and equity even more. But leading up to the September 20th climate strike, you know, in 2019, that was very much what we wanted to do, was use that strike to transform the movement and talk about it as this is the launch of a new era of the movement, a new beginning, one that is going to center people, center justice and equity, and talk about climate justice as racial justice, as immigration justice, as gender justice. And, you know, that I think for me, you know, I had spent all these years not engaging on climate, and then was able to kind of take this full circle and actually get to be a climate justice organizer and do that work, you know, day in and day out. And so I feel really, really grateful to get to continue to do that work and do that repairing of the world, however much I can. I'm really excited to see where our movement goes over this next year. I think now that we have a little more wiggle room to work with, maybe, that we're going to do a lot of disrupting and our power is going to continue to grow. So again, super honored to be on with all of y'all and excited to continue the discussion.
Thank you so much, Katie. Your story was so exciting, and it's been so wonderful to hear from all of these amazing young Jewish women activists. I guess my first question for all of you, I guess not everyone needs to answer it, but whoever feels called to it, how does your Jewish identity connect to your activism?
I can start. Okay, so here's the general stereotype that is kind of applies to me. Maybe I'm saying this bluntly, but Jews are nerds in the best way. We're the people of the book. We're always, it's so funny because I remember like telling my rabbi, like, I don't think I believe in God. And he's like, that's so Jewish of you to question things. Good job. That's actually a scene in this amazing Jewish show that I love, Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. Everyone should watch it. It has nothing to do with climate change, but 10 out of 10 show. And she was like, Rabbi, you know how I feel about God. Like, I don't believe in it. And she was like, I'm so proud of you for questioning authority. That's so Jewish of you. And so I say this to say that, like, I feel like Jewish culture, at least Reformed Jewish culture, which is what I grew up on, is, and it was my synagogue, is questioning things, reading things. You know, we're the people of the book. It's very, for me, it's less about the religious aspect and more about the cultural aspect and the whole like questioning, reading, researching. I guess like there's a certain kind of Jewish spirit and perseverance that is not exactly written in the Torah, but it is like, I don't know. I think people know what I'm talking about if you've at least if you grew up in Reformed Judaism like me. And so that kind of people of the book kind of spirit and growing up with a nerdy Jewish father who loves science and documentaries and researching things has just kind of drove me and defines my activism and how determined I am and how meticulous I am in making sure that I have all the facts and everything like that. There's also, of course, Tikkun Olam and all of these general, you know, lessons about caring for the earth and stuff. But I don't know, for me, that's honestly how Judaism comes up in my activism. I mean, I guess it's like reclaiming a stereotype or whatever, but at least I know the stereotype doesn't apply to everyone, but it definitely applies to me and my dad. So yeah, that's how Judaism affects my activism.
I'd say I feel really similarly to what Katie shared. Um, yeah, I feel like it's just like it's kind of always been around me, the like we take care of the earth, we take care of each other, like this is just like what we do as Jewish people. And I think, yeah, I just felt I really like resonated with the like before I knew what organizing and activism was, it felt like it was just like there already in my Jewish community. And I think something that I've been reflecting on a lot recently is just I feel like the temple that I grew up in, it was always like if somebody was sick, if somebody was hurt, if somebody needed anything, it was like anybody in the congregation would be there for them. And it was like we always stood up for each other and we always supported each other. And I feel like that community, like how I grew up like that of like, yeah, we're kind of like we're all family. Even if I just met you, like we're family. And I feel like that sentiment I've just like brought to my organizing, whether I knew it or not at the time. It was just like, yeah, like we're fighting for each other and we're like in this together and like we're in this like broader family.
Thank you so much, Amalia and Jamie. Both of those really resonated with me. I also have a Jewish father who loves a good book and have been raised to love learning and activism. I guess my next question, maybe it would be good to have two people per question, but if it doesn't work out exactly like that, that's okay. My next question is, where is the Jewish community currently falling short of climate justice and where is it succeeding?
I can jump in with this one. I think that, like any, I think large constituency that's engaged on a topic for so long, like I feel like I grew up, as Amalia said too, is this like, I think part of the Jewish identity is this like real connection to the earth. And I think that is something that has been, again, I mentioned I went to Jewish day school. And so that was such a huge part of just like my education growing up. But I think that connection to that broader issue and talking about those systems of oppression, I think is something that, everyone, but I think within the Jewish community is something that, we still have to confront within ourselves and within our community and our organization organizing spaces is how are we continuing to perpetuate those systems of oppression toward others in our own community and also externally. And I think that it does go beyond just that environmental climate piece to talk about how are we talking about justice and how justice issues intersects with climate. I think we can always do more at challenging ourselves to have those hard conversations and those difficult conversations, especially, at least for me, like growing up, there was a real generational divide within our Jewish community around how people saw their Jewish identity and oriented themselves to, you know, issues affecting Jewish folks, and then how those same issues were affecting non-Jewish folks. And I think that that's something that as a community we have to continue to grapple with and really sort of challenge ourselves to see like how can we collectively start to address sort of how we're continuing to perpetuate some of those systems.
I definitely want to jump in here and just really piggyback off what Katie is talking about. I think that in addition to that, like, I feel like I would really like there to be a reframing within the Jewish community about it, like that racial justice is a Jewish issue. Migrant justice is a Jewish issue. Like our community is so diverse. Like we have Jews of every color from all different countries that are experiencing all different kinds of oppressions. And I think it's really easy for us to act as if that work is outside of our community and we're being allies, you know, like we have to support those that are in our community and know that if we're committing to fighting climate justice, then we're committing to dismantle white supremacy and colonialism and patriarchy and, you know, all of these foundational systems of oppression that have fueled the climate crisis and that impact many people in our community. And I would like to go back to the first question because I do want to answer that as well, if that's okay. Okay, cool. For me, my Jewish identity has always been cultural. I never really felt connected to Judaism religiously. And, you know, I think that had a lot to do with like the Jewish spaces that I was in being very white and just not feeling connected to that. But, you know, the way that I think my cultural Jewish identity really plays into my activism is through my ancestors. And, you know, I have Jewish ancestors that escaped pogroms in Eastern Europe and like literally fought fascism and had to do that for their life, you know, and like that resistance, that trauma exists in me on both sides, you know, because I also, on the other hand, like have a lineage of ancestors who were enslaved in this country and who fought and resisted at every single different way that slavery was constructed to now, you know. And so for me, being grounded in my people, both on the Jewish side of me and the Black side, really grounds me in my activism and gives me the fuel to keep going and know that I have the ability to do the work that I'm trying to do because my ancestors have been doing it for generations.
Isha shared a little bit about the history of the environmental movement being very white dominated and inaccessible to marginalized community. As the climate movement works to center BIPOC experiences and frontline voices, how can the Jewish community amplify frontline voices and policies uplifting frontline communities in the climate crisis?
I'll start the conversation around this. I think it really, like, just to refer back to what I was saying before, you know, like first, you know, it's a tough, I feel like I never want to just answer this question objectively because I feel like there's no objective answer, at least in my opinion. And I think that there's a fine line between like following the leadership of BIPOC community members and community activists and like being like, teach me about racism, make me a better white person. Like, you know, like there's it's easy to cross over into those areas. So, you know, just like being mindful of that, but also like it's important to have spaces in which, and I'm specifically talking about, you know, racial justice and racial issues here, like to have spaces of white people who are talking about white privilege and racism in their own groups and educating their white peers. And it is important for white people to follow the leadership and the guidance of BIPOC folks who are doing the work. And I think that generally, like if you are, you know, in an organization, especially a Jewish organization, like look around at who's at the table with you. Like, are there any, does the diversity at the table reflect the diversity of the Jewish community? Probably not. So that is one place where the work needs to be done. You know, but also just keeping in mind that like in this movement, Black and brown people, not even just Black and brown people, but frontline communities, those who are being most impacted by climate justice or climate change, need to be the ones who are leading. So before you start trying to start your own thing or organize your own thing, do some research, like what work is already being done, what BIPOC led, frontline led work is already being done, and how can you plug into that? How can you support that without taking it over?
I think as well, to jump off of that, I think also thinking about what you consume and what you're reading and watching and listening to and who those voices are is another really key thing. And I think, you know, when we saw this past summer with the rise of visibility around movement for Black lives, like a lot of people in my family and other folks in the Jewish community that, you know, were engaging with the movement on social media or amplifying it. I think as Jewish folks, I'm going to say this as carefully as I can, as Jewish folks, like I think that because we too have, you know, such a strong history of anti-Semitism and, you know, oppression as a people, I think that there is sometimes a tendency to fall back on that or to use that to justify not further educating ourselves or being allies to other communities, I think particularly the Black community. And so I think that, you know, part of what we really have to challenge ourselves to do on the individual level is not fall into that sort of trap of saying, you know, oh, you understand because, or trying to compare oppression or any of that, because I think that's a lot of times where we do see the Jewish community sometimes becoming a little bit insular and not engaging externally in a way that I think is productive and is sort of addressing, again, some of those systems of oppression. And so I think, especially as young Jewish folks, like really taking it on yourself to educate yourself and learn and like do the research on your own so that you can show up in spaces and be that voice to say, like looking around and say, like, we don't have this voice here, or we don't have this like this identity in the room. And I think making sure that we are sort of taking that on ourselves to be allies for others. And the last thing I'll say is that I think that there is a really amazing history and deep history in our culture of engaging with activism and Jewish folks. You know, there's so many Jewish folks in the climate movement and other movements. And I think that that's so amazing. And I think if we can continue to push each other and really challenge each other to be leaders in talking about diversity, talking about justice, I think that we will, as people, continue to be able to continue to be and grow as allies to other movements and other constituencies and other identities.
I'd love to quickly jump in. I, first of all, totally agree with everything that Isha and Katie said. And then there's this parallel that's coming up in my head of how it's like the environmental movement has really, like, the popular one of the past like 60 years has been super white. And then I think there's also this really big misconception that, like, all Jews are like Ashkenazi and white and like look this one certain way, and like that's who Jewish people are. And I think that a lot of climate organizers recently have been like, no, like we need to redefine the climate movement because this isn't just, this isn't right. And I don't know, I would love to like see the Jewish community kind of like, especially like white Jews in the US, really take it upon themselves to be like, let's redefine what people think when they think like of a Jewish person, because clearly not all Jews are white and Ashkenazi. And I think there's just like a lot of unlearning that needs to be done from the white Jewish community there. And just like, I would just like love to see some of the same transformations that we're seeing in climate organizing within the Jewish community as well.
Thank you so much. Those answers were all so insightful and so important, and I think something that our community really needs to hear. My next question is about Jamie's story. She spoke about the experience of trying to knock down legislators' doors and placing faith in Democrats to take action, but ultimately becoming more aware of the passivity of elected officials from any political party. As we move into the first year of a Biden presidency, what some activists are calling the first year of the decade of the Green New Deal, how do you envision the youth movement responding to national calls of hope for major federal climate policy this year versus fears that a not progressive enough administration will fail to deliver at the scale we need? How do we win actual climate policy while not putting too much faith in any one politician?
Well, I think that, the great thing about this new administration is before we were talking to a wall and we were in damage control mode. Now we're not in damage control mode and we can actually be on the offensive. The re-entering the Paris Climate Accords and shutting down the Keystone Pipeline is a great start, but we, as the climate movement as a whole, need to push for more. Kamala Harris said in the debates and then tweeted a bunch about how we're not going to ban fracking. Joe Biden doesn't want to ban fracking. And oftentimes it takes pressure to get them where we need to be. But now this administration is actually probably, hopefully reasonable. And so we can like put on the pressure of like, hey, fracking is actually bad. Let's not. We can push, okay, great, shut down the Keystone Pipeline, time to shut down the Dakota Access Pipeline, time to stop Line 3, time to stop the liquid natural gas terminal. The administration Biden spoke about climate change in the inauguration and promised to take climate action, but we have to hold the administration to their word and make sure that there isn't just lip service, but there's actual climate action. And so as we enter this new era, here's the thing, we have Democratic control of the House, Senate, and presidency. So they have before they had an excuse of, well, we can't pass it because Mitch McConnell is going to block it. But now Mitch McConnell is the minority leader, which is great to say because bye-bye. So now Democrats have the majority, so there's no excuse we can be pushing climate action through just passing stuff because we have the majority. And so I don't want to hear excuses now. They don't have the excuse of, but the Republicans will stop it anymore, because it's you literally control the entire government now. Use the majority, use the supermajority. And I don't want to see Democrats wasting this opportunity of having a supermajority, having control out of everything and just sitting back and being like, let's compromise. There's no this whole myth of unity. I'm not uniting with fascists. I'm sorry. I have no intention of uniting with the Republican politicians who have enabled fascism. I'm not gonna, I don't know. People are always reach across the aisle, embrace different opinions. I'm your opinions are deadly, so I will not reach across the aisle and embrace you. Goodbye. So I really hope they don't fall into that kind of kumbaya, it's okay, let's compromise for the fascists, and actually instead focus on ramming through climate action while we have the majority. Because as we know, often midterms, there's a pattern of retaliation towards the current majority. So last midterms, the Democrats won back the House and then in the midterms in the middle of the Obama administration, Republicans regained control. So before midterms, that often, it doesn't have to happen, but there's often the opposite party often kind of has a resurgence. We need to ramp through as much as possible in these first 100 days.
I think one of the things that I want to say to this is that we can't forget that getting Joe Biden and Kamala Harris elected was the people's win. Getting a Democratic Senate was the people's win. Like, we did that. That was the blood, sweat, and tears of people on the ground, especially Black women, especially young people. Like, we did that, okay? So one, they're responsible to us. Like, the idea of having elected politicians at all is that they represent the people, that they do what the people need to do. So we need to keep that in mind throughout this entire 4 years. And, you know, on top of that, like, we prove to ourselves what the power that we have, like what we were able to accomplish. Like, we beat insurmountable odds. Like, we won that election. It was not close. We won one, and it was barely free and fair because of all the voter suppression and gerrymandering and the Electoral College. So let's just say that and know that that is exactly what we need to keep doing throughout this 4 years. And if we do, we will be able to do exactly what it is that we need to in order to dismantle, you know, systems of oppression that are terrorizing people and fueling the climate crisis, and stop the climate crisis altogether before we don't have a planet to live on.
Just adding on super quickly, like, you're totally right. Like, we, the people, are the one who put them in office, and like, us, the movement, have the power to take their seats away. And if they don't vote the way we want them to vote, if they don't pass the legislation that we need to survive, like, they're not going to last, and we're going to have somebody else replace them. And I feel like making sure they know that, and making sure that they know that they're in our debt and that we can take away their power when we want to, is so crucial. And another thing that I've just been thinking about is, like, we are in an insane economic crisis right now. And it's really only smart policy to pass bills that are like the Green New Deal or parts of the Green New Deal, because we need an economic recovery like the New Deal. And we know that we need it to be green if we're going to survive. And it's just only smart policy. And yeah, I'm just like, we've seen Youth versus Apocalypse go after politicians and be like, we're right and you're wrong. We've seen all of our movements do it. And I'm like, we're at a beautiful moment in history where we can just keep doing that, and we're right, and we're on the right side of history, and we know exactly where we need to go.
I just want to jump in here one more time, because you saying that just sort of like sparked that, you know, in addition to like being in this economic crisis, like talking a little bit more broadly now, like what we're experiencing right now through this pandemic, through the rise of fascism, through, you know, the economic downturn, like through all of that, is the crumbling of our unsustainable foundation of white supremacy and colonialism and patriarchy and capitalism. And that means that we have this unique opportunity to do the work that we've been trying to do, which is to dismantle that foundation and build something new in its place. Our normalcy is no more, the state of normalcy that we were living in is no more, because that foundation is crumbling. And so now we have the opportunity to build a new normal, because we have to, whether it becomes as shitty as the last one or it becomes something new and powerful. And, you know, like Amalia said, it only makes sense. It's only good policy to be passing things that are green, that are just, that are equitable, because that is the only way that we're going to survive. And thank God we have the opportunity to actually do that right now.
And I'll just jump in to say, first of all, yes to everything everybody has said. And also, you know, we've seen from the Biden administration that he's movable. If we push his administration, he will move. The climate plan that Biden ran on was the most ambitious climate plan that any Democratic nominee has ever run on. And it was language that the movement has been using. It came directly from movement leaders. And so I think that, you know we can push them. And so what we need is to build the type of sustained energy to show up constantly. So we're continuing to push Biden and his administration farther than we think we can go. And then we continue, these 2 years are going to do a lot, but we have a lot to do in these 2 years. So it's important that we stay engaged and we continue to build power, continue to vote in elected officials that represent our values, and then run for office. We need a wave of young people of Generation Z to run for office. What I think is so fantastic about the youth climate movement is that it is mostly women and non-binary folks, so many powerful women of color, and these folks have got to be running for office so that our leadership can look like, sound like, come from the communities that our movement is representing and are needing to be sitting at the center and leading us on the path toward recovering from climate change and addressing so many other issues down the line as well.
Thank you so much, everyone. Those answers were all so good. And I'm so excited for the youth climate movement to take action and keep pushing this administration. My next question is, in her story, Amalia spoke about the experience of young people leading a full community to bravely stand together and take collective risks, even to the extent of standing together while risking arrest with no one leaving, creating a feeling of power in one specific moment. How can the Jewish community listen to and follow the leadership of young people showing up in a courageous way of being in the room to create tremendous collective power of change, as Amalia put it? What future actions might the youth movement take that those other generations can show up in support of to recreate that sense of unstoppable power?
Cool, thanks, Holly. Yeah, great question. Well, first of all, I think we've seen an incredible amount of youth organizing over the last 4 years, and it's only going to increase. And I think, looking back in history, often social movements are led by young people. And so that's not going away. There's going to be lots of opportunities for the older Jewish community to support young people on the front lines. And yeah, honestly, so the first things that are coming to mind are just like, we need strong allies who are going to support us no matter what. We don't need people to tell us that we're wrong and people to tell us that we can do things differently. We need strong, fierce allies who are going to stand behind us no matter what. And I think that can look like a lot of different things. But yeah, and like some of the most important things are just like making sure your like young organizers in your community are like fed and like sleeping and like have water at their actions and like have rides places if they need them. And there's so much you can do like on the ground local organizing that adults can like really support and plug into. So if you're an adult in the Jewish community and young organizers, like reach out, be like, do you need food at your next action? Like, do you need rides? How can I support? Is there a place I can donate? And it goes like such a long way. Like one text could really go such a long way. I know when I was organizing for the September 20th climate strike, like so many people who belong to my temple, so many adults were like, I'm like not able to make it like X, Y, and Z, but I'm sending you a check for $18, like use it to like buy food that day, like to make sure that you're getting food. And I know that was always super important to me. Yeah, and I think just like showing up when you can, if you can show up at those actions, always really, really a huge deal to know that your community is behind you.
I'd also say intergenerational organizing is very important, and not, both generations have something, well, there's multiple generations. Every generation has something to learn from each other, and traditionally community organizing, I don't fully believe in like the youth are better than anyone. I think that the only difference between this generation and others is that like with social media and other platforms, it's easier for us to be heard, but there have been great environmental defenders. There have been great environmental defenders of all generations. And so it's important that we, I don't like the narrative of like the youth will save us all or that there's anything special about us, not to crap on that, but it's really just, I don't believe that this generation is the youth that is any better than the last generation. It's just that I feel like there's more opportunities to share our voice. And that's why intergenerational organizing is incredibly important in accepting that there are great organizers and activists in every generation, and we have to work together and learn from each other. And no one generation should be in the back, and everyone should be working together and supporting each other.
Thank you so much, Jamie. All of you have shared moments where you brazenly and unapologetically challenge the establishment and those in power for their failure to use their positions of authority to make moral, equitable, and justice changes. What advice do you have for other aspiring activists, Jewish or otherwise, for developing the energy and courage to replicate this and, as Jamie's book says, speak truth to power?
I would say that for young folks who are interested in getting involved is just do it. And there's never really going to be a perfect time. You're definitely not going to know enough. But if you have an idea for change or you see a problem that you want to address, get involved and get involved locally. Local organizing is where the change happens at the grassroots. And so if you want to get involved, there are youth-led organizations on climate and so many other issues all across the country. So do some Googling, some Instagram stalking, and reach out to folks and just get started. And I think, build from there.
I 100% second that. And I add, like, there is a place for every single person in this movement. We need every single person in this movement, whether you are an artist or you do graphic design or you know how to fundraise or you're a good speaker or you like to write speeches but not speak, or you're good at like talking to people, you like doing phone baking, like whatever your interests are, there is a need for you in the movement. And so know that like your voice matters. And like Katie said, the best way to do it is to just do it. Like none of us knew anything when we were getting into it. We certainly didn't know enough. And I still don't think that I know enough, and I'm still learning every single day. And that's the nature of this work. So just do it. I like that quote.
Yeah, I totally agree with both of you. Yeah, and again, it's gonna feel scary, and that's totally normal and totally fine and good, because you're like doing this really cool thing, and like whether you're 8 or you're 18 and you want to get involved, like there's a space for you. And I know it feels scary, but honestly, organizers are the best people I know. Like I found the coolest, nicest people through organizing. And as soon as you go, you're like, hi, I'm blah, blah, blah. And you're like, you're so great. I love you. Like, I'm so glad we're in this together. And yeah, it'll be like the best people you've ever met.
Thank you so much. That is all great advice. And you're right about not feeling like you know everything, but that's okay. My last question for everyone here is, how can someone watching in the audience get involved with your organization? Just like, a website, social media, the best way.
For YVA, you can go to youthversusapocalypse.org. We have all of the information about our organization on there, and you can sign up to be a part of our different campaigns. We have a bunch of different stuff like Green New Deal, California Youth versus Big Oil, CalSTRS. We got hip hop and climate justice stuff. A lot of good stuff for you on that website. And if you want to follow us on social media, you can follow us at Youth versus Apocalypse. On Instagram and on Twitter, we're at Y_VS_A.
And when you go check out YVA, watch their music videos because they are my favorite content that exists from the climate movement. They're awesome. For Future Coalition, you can go to futurecoalition.org and check out everything we do, or follow us everywhere at Future Coalition and see what we're up to.
Wow, I need to check out these music videos, clearly. For Sunrise Movement, yeah, you can just look up, you can just look up Sunrise Movement. You can go to sunrisemovement.org. The best way to get involved is to join or start a hub, which is our organizing unit. You can find our hub map and list on our website. If you don't want to go there, you can go to Instagram. You can just look up like Sunrise Boston and see if there's a Sunrise Boston. We've got like 500 hubs across the country, so most likely there'll be one near you. You can look up Sunrise Movement on all social media platforms and you'll find us.
Yeah, so if you want to stay in touch with me and get involved with Zero Hour, you can go to thisiszerohour.org, or you can follow at This Is Zero Hour on any social media platform. It's just the @ and then This Is Zero Hour. If you want to stay connected with me, all of my social media platforms, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook are just my name, Jamie Margolin. So you can feel free to send me a DM, and I'd love to connect with you that way. And if you'd like to read my book on how to be a young organizer and activist for any cause, that is a guidebook to help anyone who wants to get involved but doesn't know how. You can ask for Youth to Power at your local bookstore, or go to www.youthtopowerbook.com. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in, and it's been great to connect.
Perfect. Thanks so much, everyone. I'm so excited for all of the people watching to get involved. And again, thank you so much for your empowering stories and insights into this exciting movement. I've been thinking recently about the poem that the Youth Poet Laureate Amanda Gorman read at the inauguration recently. At the very end, she said, "For there's always light if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it." All of the people here today, the panelists and the attendees, are being that light. If you haven't gotten plugged into some actions from other events at the Fest, here are some ways you can get involved to continue taking action and joining the movement for climate justice. You can get involved with any of the organizations that our speakers are a part of: Zero Hour, Sunrise Movement, Youth versus Apocalypse, or Future Coalition. You can participate in the Brit Hazon, which is a program designed to help you make personal changes to be more sustainable. Your institution, like synagogue or school, can also join the Hazon Seal of Sustainability. You can divest your money from banks that invest in fossil fuels and ask your institutions to do the same. Lastly, if you're interested in learning more about or getting involved with the Jewish Youth Climate Movement, please go to our website, jewishyouthclimatemovement.org, or send us an email at jycm@hazon.org, and check us out on Instagram and Facebook, Jewish Youth Climate Movement. Thank you to our wonderful storytellers, and thanks to all of our attendees for coming.